is Luther Beck. Powerhouse is the show. I want to bless you today. I want to say bless you from a genuine place. I really do bless you. It's an exciting time to be alive. Each one of you have a purpose and a destiny. There's only one you. And I know that's a cheesy thing, there's only one. Think about it. There is only one you. And you're very needed and important in this day and age. Guys, I'm going to have a show every Sunday, going to record it and post it, so by Sunday night you should be able to listen to a brand new episode each week, or start with it on Monday. Start your week out with Powerhouse. This is episode 9, so I've made it 9 episodes in. I want to give a shout out to Aubrey. Aubrey is from the Volunteer State. Well, I don't know if she's from there, but she lives in Tennessee. You remember that song, Tennessee, Tennessee, there ain't no place. I'm talking to my wife who is in studio. She's going to be our guest today. But thank you, Aubrey, for being a fan of the show, for tuning in. Bless you out there, sister. Keep listening. I wanted to go and quote a guy named Nelson Mandela. Now, does anybody know who Nelson Mandela is? I don't know a whole lot about him, but I know he was a South African activist. He was anti-apartheid. That was his thing. I think he was the first president of South Africa. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. He might be an author, but he did a lot of activism and things like that, anti-racism and things like that. So here's the quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." I'm going to read that again. There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And so that's profound. I think people have re-quoted that and said, you can tell where a society is by the way it treats its children. And of course, we have to think about how a statement like that applies to us here in the United States as well. The kids are all right. Do you remember the band The Who? Is that cool anymore? When I was in high school, we were, I guess you could say, the rebellious punk rock type. We would sew patches onto our clothing and things like that. And at a certain point, some of these guys who transferred from a different school, who were also in punk rock bands and grunge bands, they started sewing on homemade patches onto their jackets from The Who. And I remember being like, what in the world? These guys are digging kind of deep. Well, little did I know I would become a huge Who fan. And those guys were right. The Who was really kind of the originators that started throwing down, talking about my generation. It was the 60s and 70s style of punk rock, I guess, before punk rock existed. And I did get to see Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend, and The Who at Shoreline Amphitheater in San Francisco. That's a different story. But yeah, they had a song, "The kids are all right," and that kind of became a phrase. The kids are all right. I think that they were talking about leave the kids alone. We can do what we want. We can rebel. We can handle ourselves. We can grow our hair long. That kind of a thing. Sort of a hippie message. But I thought about that song before this show because I knew I wanted to talk about kids. And so that statement, the kids are all right, I want to flip it around and ask my in-studio guest, my wife, are the kids all right? So welcome to Powerhouse, Jacqueline. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, thanks for having me. Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
Good. I'm really glad to have you too. And of course, we're married, but we also have sort of different lines of research and different things that we're into. And of course, those things intersect and we have unity in what our mission is. But you are a mom, so just tell us a little bit about, how you feel about this question. Are the kids all right?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, but at the same time, yes and no. Some kids are very well off and safe and great, and they themselves are advocates and activists and generation changers. But some of them aren't all right, and they need our attention and our support and our help.
Yeah, I kind of grew up with. I'm for sure. My parents said, eat your asparagus, eat your broccoli, eat your cauliflower. There's starving kids in Africa, or there's starving kids in China. I think maybe every parent said that in the '90s to their kids. I guess if they wanted them to eat their vegetables, but there's this, and that's true. There are dire straits going on in places like Cambodia, or the kids that live in trash cities and they're stepping on junk all the time.
Right.
But there's also a huge problem in our own backyard. The mental health crisis in the United States right now we can't ignore that, especially among teens. 1 in 5 female teens and 1 in 7 males engage in self-harm. So they hurt themselves. They're cutters, or to whatever degree they are suicidal. There are 6,500 annual suicides in the U.S. for ages 10 to 24. This is Pew Research information that I was privy to. 48,000 died by suicide in 2021. Now that was all ages, but it still goes to show that not all the kids are all right, like what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you mentioned the kids in the trash cities and the kids in Cambodia, and those are always the kids I was extremely concerned about for several years. I would think about them, and because about 10 years ago we watched a documentary called The Kids of Cambodia, and it was about these kids who literally live in the sewers. And they go out during the day and they play songs and get money off the streets, and then they just dig in dumpsters and live in sewers. And I always thought, man, I'm going to have to move to Cambodia, open up an orphanage, and start mothering all of these kids. And I mean, maybe someday I will, but in the most recent years, I have realized that there are so many kids who live so near to us who actually need our help, and my eyes have really been opened up to that. For example, just the children who are in the foster care system in the United States are around 400,000. About 400,000 kids in the foster care system right now in the United States. And about a fourth of those kids are legally free for adoption, meaning their parents have terminated their parental rights and their birth rights.
Wow.
So there are about 100,000 kids in America who are just waiting for families, and around a third of those children age out of the foster care system without ever getting a family, and they enter into young adulthood with no real lifelong permanent support network, such as a family, an adoptive family. So to me, those numbers are so overwhelming, and I have this thought like, oh, we need to open up this huge, children's home where we can take hundreds, but really we can take 1 or 2, and you can take 1 or 2, and other people can take 1 or 2, and honestly, we can minimize that number of responsibility for each person if we can all link arms together to receive these children that are our own flesh and blood, American citizens, American children. So if you think, let's say 100,000 kids are in foster care, just legally free and waiting for adoptive homes, right? So, and then how many states are there? 50, right? So if, we raise up 1,000 families from each state to take 2 kids each, then that would be enough, right? So if you have 1,000 families in North Carolina who take 2 kids each, then that's 2,000 kids. And then times that by 50, then we would pretty much take care of the orphan problem. Another statistic I wanted to talk about was just the number of Protestant Christian churches in America are around the same number of how many kids are actually in the foster care system. Just coincidentally, there are about 380,000 Protestant Christian churches in America. So if less than a third of those churches, say 33% of those churches in America, each one of those churches could receive one child into their entire congregation. So raise up one family who can take them, open their hearts, open their homes, and then the rest of the congregation of that church can support that adoptive family financially, physically, mentally, emotionally, helping them through that process. We have more than enough hands, finances, and hearts to receive these children in America.
You bring up a good point, because I've heard this a lot. Well, it's the church's job to ... And yet we let the government or, healthcare try to come in and fix it the best way they know how, which, if you believe and know what Jesus came with and what his ministry, what his kingdom, and what his gospel, his good news was about, it changed cities upside down. If you read the book of Acts, if you read the Bible, they transformed culture. The Bible talks about not growing weary of doing good. Jesus commanded his followers to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So what would we have people do unto us if we were those children, which they exist? We have the numbers. They're there. They're suffering. They're hurting. They're trafficked. I mean, there are 500,000 kids in the U.S. that are being trafficked every day in every zip code in the U.S. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of kids. I mean, that's sex trafficking. The U.S. is the biggest customer of child sex in the world. So even kids get shipped into the U.S. from other countries for buyers that are here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So this problem with, are the children all right? Are the kids all right? It's almost like once you touch the tip of the iceberg, you figure out, oh my gosh, there has to be a monumental effort, like something that you're talking about. Definitely the church being engaged. Definitely one family from each church could do something, and we're actually commanded to do it. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. So what if these were your kids? And they could very, very well be our kids if we're not careful. And this isn't to stir up fear. I think we're talking about this because, yes, it's an overwhelming subject, but leaving the government to do it is not enough. It's not working. There's kids that as we're researching this, and as we're trying to do something about it ourselves, we're finding out there's kids sleeping in DSS offices and there's nowhere for them to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. We've been doing research on the adoption and foster care system for over a year now, and we have learned a lot of things, and I'm glad that we have learned a lot of things. And then to take it back to your point about just leaving it to the government to do things, and when people say, well, it's the church's job to, take care of the poor and the orphan and the widow, because biblically speaking, it is our job. But at the same time, you see a vast majority of people who call themselves Christians not having their own ministry. A lot of people, for some reason, the church has been put to sleep. It's like there's this giant sleeping pill where Christians aren't necessarily active in ministry. And honestly, I think that the true purpose of a Christian is to have their own ministry. Every single person who follows Jesus should have their own ministry. And by that, I mean actively helping others. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit organization. You don't have to be all professional or anything like that. But there are many things that we can do in our own neighborhoods, families, communities to help those who need our help.
So not just passing out Jesus tracts and saying, go and be filled, or go, there's almost this sense that you've done your duty if you, say that you'll pray for somebody or something like that. Or even if you preach the gospel to them, but if there's no hands-on, in the Bible, faith is equal to obedience to God's commands, which God tells us throughout the whole Bible that he cares about justice for the orphans, justice for the widows, justice for the poor. And he showed that and demonstrated that in his earthly life. And as I said on last week's podcast, that the church is supposed to be a continuation of the very same things that Jesus did.
Yep. Yeah, the Bible says that just as he was in this world, so are we. And if we are Christians, then we're to look like him and do the things that he did and walk and act as he would walk and act.
So what do we do? Because, I could read in Isaiah 58 where it talks about religious activities and fasting and how God doesn't really care about any of that. If you read Isaiah 58, he says he really wants, instead of all that, to let the oppressed go free and to undo the straps of people's yokes, to bring the homeless poor into your house, and when you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. And to share your bread with the hungry. I mean, it can go on and on and on and on. We could talk about true and undefiled religion from the book of James. And it does say in James, to pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. So how are we to do this if we see that some people are doing it? There are a lot of ministries that, for example, pass out food, maybe really cheap food, but there's ministries that pass out food to homeless and poor people, which is great. But like I said about that tip of the iceberg, we're finding out, hey, this is like dire straits. There's kids that need homes, there's kids that are neglected, and they need love. Can you just talk sort of about your heart and sort of why you got into this and what you see realistic things for people to do?
Yeah, well, actually, it really started, like I said, 10 years ago when we watched that Kids of Cambodia documentary, and I was just waiting as we were kind of going through life and growing as Christians and getting our family strong, and that's okay. Everyone has to go through that season of life where you're actually, like, getting strengthened, and ready, and that's okay. I'm not condemning anybody, and neither is God. But that was always in my heart, and we, prayed about it, and we agreed upon it that we would adopt a child one day. And that was about 5 years ago. Well, we had another baby, and then, like I said, about 18 months ago, I started having these dreams about some baby who was abandoned and who needed a mother, and I was available. And I was like, okay, well, I can take this baby. I had so many dreams, and my heart was just broken for this child who was mine, who I didn't know where he was. And at the time, we were staying at a friend's house and building our bus into an RV, and we prayed for a while, and then we started doing research on adoption. And we learned about all the different types of adoption: international adoption, domestic infant adoption, adoption through foster care, kinship adoption. So now we have taken the 2-month-long class to become licensed. We are in the process of getting licensed.
For foster.
For being able to foster or adopt in North Carolina. And it's a pretty long and complicated process, and we're kind of hitting some speed bumps where there's some issues that might be slowing us down a little bit. But either way, we will navigate this and let the Lord lead us through this until we have fulfilled this calling in our lives. Everyone is in a different place in their life. And, also at one point I read that although about a third of Americans have thought about, considered, or cared about adoption, but only 2% actually are able to go through it. Now, I think
2% of all Americans?
Yeah, have actually adopted, I believe. I mean, I read that on, I think, adoptuskids.org. That's a great website to find out tons of information. They have every single state and all of the different process and requirements for this. So I think that was such an interesting statistic. Wow, 33% of people actually think about, care, and want to or consider adoption. That's a big number. That's good. But only 2% actually walk through it. And I'm thinking, how can we use our voices and the information that we've found out to help remove some of those barriers to those families who have thought about, considered, desired to? But there's all these, oh, but what about this? And isn't it hard, and isn't it complicated, and doesn't it take forever, and do I have enough money, and I'm a single parent, or I already have these kids, or do I, all these
So there's a million
obstacles.
reasons why people back out.
And it's hard. It's so overwhelming. I've done so many phone calls. I've done so many hours of research on the internet. I've called so many social workers and just asked questions. And I think that I just want to share some information with anybody who will really listen. Because even if you're not in a place where you can open up your doors and your home and your heart to someone to actually physically receive them into your home and into your family, there are so many other things you can do. We need to have an entire community to support this. There are actually the government and other private agencies are actually starting a lot more preventative programs to prevent children from being taken away from their birth families. We're trying to see the problem before it gets so bad that the children are in danger and then get removed.
Yeah, something as simple as talk to your neighbors.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
I was doing my side of the research, and Jacqueline, you were doing your side of the research, I was finding breadcrumbs to all of these other problems, like the human trafficking, like the satanic ritual abuse, and even back all the way to the beginning, like what you said, broken families, dads that are on drugs, moms that are on drugs, alcoholism. And I was seeing all these connections like, oh my gosh, we can do a preemptive strike on helping families before they reach this point, because it's already way too overwhelming. There's already way too many children that have been abused or neglected.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, even as something as simple as, hey, know who your neighbors are. Talk to people. Talk to your kids. Know who your kids are. Train your kids to talk to other kids.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And actually, like, the situation has actually gotten more desperate in the recent years because there was a federal law that was passed a few years ago that dramatically decreased government funds to supporting group home facilities for foster children. And a lot of them shut down, at least in North Carolina. A lot of the other ones who are still open have a lot of private individual financial supporters. That's one big thing that we need. We need people, say maybe you're older or you don't have the lifestyle to actually become an adoptive or a foster parent, but maybe you have a little wiggle room in your budget. Anything helps. You can donate a bed. You can donate diapers and wipes regularly to either your local DSS office or a private foster and adoption agency that's near your city. Financial donations is a big part of it to keep these places running. What else was I saying? Okay, so yeah, the recent change in the federal law that dramatically decreased government funding to support these agencies and group homes was one problem.
So they're shutting down group homes that have overflow, extra kids who have not been adopted.
Well,
Right.
a lot of these group homes are actually housing teenagers because, unfortunately, a lot of the teenagers who are in the foster care system are like the most unwanted in the system. And a lot of them are really good kids. They just need stability. And another recent change in our country was COVID, and 25% of foster homes closed their doors during COVID, and they have not reopened their homes to become foster. I mean, not all of them, but we haven't seen those numbers go back up yet.
So we have the least amount of foster and adoptive families that are open to doing it.
And less group homes. We have a huge need for beds right now for children. And actually, the number of children entering into the foster care system is increasing while the number of foster families is decreasing. So you have this big problem. And I think that we just need to use our voices to raise up more people to be able to be able to dedicate.
So you would consider yourself an advocate for child safety or for, helping the children, whatever you want to say. So anybody out there, if you have a church or a pulpit or a website or a podcast of your own or anything, and you would like to bring on Jacqueline to speak, we're into that too. We're into raising awareness, raising up the battle cry and saying, hey, we have to at least do something. Is doing nothing even an option?
Not if you consider yourself a Christian, absolutely not. We can't judge those who don't follow the Lord Jesus Christ, but if you call yourself a Christian, then doing nothing isn't an option, because there's that one scripture that, he said, all right, guys, come into my kingdom because you fed me when I was hungry, you clothed me when I was naked, you visited me when I was sick and in prison. Enter into, bliss. And they were like, when did we see you hungry and feed you, Lord? And all these other things. And he said, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And then some of the people who called themselves Christians and expected to get into heaven, he said, depart from me, you evil workers of iniquity, of sin. You sinners, get away. Because you saw me hungry and you didn't feed me. You saw me naked and you did not clothe me. You saw that I was sick and I was in prison and you never visited me. And they said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and not feed you? When were you sick and in prison and we didn't visit you? And he said, when you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it unto me.
Yeah, so basically the people who failed were the people who did nothing. And Jesus said you were when you were doing those small things for those small people, you were doing it to me. I even remember Jesus' disciples when he's walking around and little kids start coming up and grabbing on Jesus. And they're like, shoo, 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 get away, little kids, get away. And Jesus goes, hey, let the little children come to me. So Jesus is into helping children. He's into taking the time out of our busy schedules for children. Back to the very beginning with Nelson Mandela. Hey, you can tell a culture, you can tell the soul of a culture. You can read the soul of a society by the way that they treat its children. Don't even get me started on abortion and more about trafficking, pedophilia, and kids. The average age that kids see porn is like 8 now. Okay, so yeah, our culture and the children, it's not matching up. There's something wrong, and somebody has to stand in the gap for these children.
Yeah, definitely. And the problem seems so overwhelming, but we really want to talk and have these conversations to remove some of these barriers, to open up ways where we can put our hands in the dirt and volunteer in our communities and help people and really inspire people and help everybody know that you can make a difference. Mm-hmm. You have something to offer someone else in this world.
Absolutely.
You can make a difference. You can. And we can help you figure out how to make a difference.
Absolutely.
It takes a little bit of research. It takes a little bit of where are these communities at and what nonprofit organizations are there that exist in your local community? Can I volunteer at one? Or does my neighbor need help at all? Or whatever.
Yeah, and it reminds me, I was talking about the volunteer state, Tennessee, at the very beginning. Yeah. Well, we don't have time to go into this lady's story, but Jacqueline has been on the road. She's been going and visiting people. We have been communicating with other ministries who are starting to help in this area of the kids that are aging out of the foster system, and also people who are working with anti-trafficking. But this lady in Tennessee, mm-hmm. Angie, I think I can say her name, Angie.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have time to go into her story, but just tell people what one person can do.
She's amazing. She's such an inspiration. I really want to go meet with her again because she has made such a huge impact in her community, in her region. She started 22 years ago with just a phone number in the newspaper saying, call if you need help. and it was specifically like a crisis pregnancy center, which she didn't even have a building or anything, but she would start getting these phone calls from these young girls. I need a pregnancy test. I need, to help. I need you to help me find a doctor so I can go see a doctor. I need diapers, and I actually don't want to keep my baby. What should I do? And then she started just creating this community center where she's like a connection point of like community building, where now she gives free counseling to ladies in crisis, free like feminine health care. If they don't want to keep their babies, she counsels them to keep them and then give them up for adoption, and then the community can receive this baby. A family will come adopt the baby. It's all free. It's all free. It's not funded by the government at all. There are so many families and children who do not have enough food. So she has this summer feeding program where they're feeding 400 to 500 families in their community every day of the summer, because a lot of these kids get fed a lot just at school. The free food, the free lunch program in the public school system. These kids are getting fed at school. Well, whenever they're on summer break, they don't have enough food. So, and it's great. It's like all these different businesses and churches and organizations will be like, I'll take this day. And like this one church will make 500 bologna and cheese sandwiches, and they'll go help drive it around. And
it's just inspiring because it's one little lady. Now, she started 22 years ago, but what she's built now, Jacqueline said, it was like mega, helping the whole community.
But it's not even her. She's like a connection point. She didn't have a bunch of money or a bunch of things herself, but she got... One family offered an acre of land, and then everybody started growing this garden, and now they have a bunch of food that they've grown. And then this other nursery, this plant nursery, donated like $10,000 in plants to, grow for the community. It's just great. I just love seeing how the whole entire community is taking care of their community.
Yeah. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. This is what we would want people to do to us. I've fell on hard times before. Yeah. I have been down and out. I think a lot of us have. Yeah. And you don't have to go to Cambodia or to China or to Africa to see that there's a huge need for children, for families, and there's something that we can do about it. Guys, one thing that you can do is pray to God and ask Him, how can I help? Mm-hmm. What can me and my family do? What can I do? What are some steps that I can take to help? Because this is a huge thing that's going to take all of us. We know that God is a father to the fatherless. He's a judge of the widows. He is looking down from His holy habitation, and He is intervening and interceding and acting and moving upon people's lives, and we want to join Him in that.
Yeah, you know what? I've actually heard several times, and I know that we're going to wrap this up, but I've heard so many times, if God is a righteous and loving God, then why is there so much poverty in the world? How come people are suffering? And honestly, the answer is, I put you here to do that. He created man and woman in His own image, in His likeness, with His heart, and we're supposed to be taking care of each other, and we're not. So it's actually not God's problem. I mean, it is God. He is helping He uses us.
Right. He's expecting us to join Him in this work. And
He'll open the doors too. If you just have a heart that desires to help, He'll give you opportunities. Sometimes I'm a busy mom. I'm a homeschool mom. And I feel like I can't really help much at all right now, except for in my own family, and that's okay. But I'll be driving by, and there's a bum on the side of the road holding up a sign, and every single time I see someone like that, I look around in my car. What do I have? I've got 50 cents in a granola bar. I'm going to give it to this guy. Mm-hmm. Because even if I'm like, I just spent way too much at the grocery store, I'm still going to hand them a box of granola bars or something.
Every one of us has something to offer, and you guys can help us. You can sow into our ministry. You can contact us and say, hey, how can I get involved locally? What are some contacts in North Carolina that I can reach out to become involved? And you can email us at powerhousepodcast7@gmail.com. Doesn't just have to be about this subject. We want to hear from you regardless. We love you. We know that we're going to come together in this somehow, and we're going to make a difference, just like Angie over in the great state of Tennessee. Guys, remember, you are a loved one. You matter. Your life counts. And as we've proved today in talking about this, we definitely need you. So God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Powerhouse. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Yeah.
Adios, amigos.